Welcome to Beyond the Press Release, a production of AGORACOM, in which we take the time to speak with small cap executives after they put out important news. With us today, happy to have him back because he's a disruptive tech visionary. Shafin Diamond, CEO of Victory Square Technologies, trades in Canada under VST, for our friends in the US, VSQTF, and even for our friends in Europe on Frankfurt under 6F6. Look, a lot of you know the AGORACOM thesis. We believe that this decade is going to create 3 times more wealth from disruptive tech than the prior 3 decades combined. And we're talking about AI, virtual reality, augmented reality, Web3, which is crypto, blockchain, NFTs, renewable energy, and so on and so forth. The challenge is that most investors, however, have very little experience in any of these because they're disruptive and they're just starting to really grow, let alone the whole basket of them. So the danger is that you end up missing the boat of probably what I think is going to be the greatest wealth creation decade in history. That's where Victory Square comes in, because it gives investors access to a basket of the best startups in the best industries with maximum growth potential, right? They build, they acquire, they invest in promising startups. They provide them the senior leadership and the resources needed to fast track their growth. And they've had great success. Right now, their portfolio's got over 25 companies in there, all from Web 3.0, blockchain, gaming, the creator economy, you name it. More than just lip service. For the 9 months ended September 30th, adjusted net income, $2.3 million. Earnings per share, 3 cents per share. Working capital, $7.8 million. They even had a couple of dividends go out in some of their portfolio companies. When do you ever hear about that in the small cap space? We're talking about the company's press release wrapping up 2021, looking forward to 2022. Shafin, welcome back, my friend.
Thanks for having me, George.
Hey, let's talk first about the stat before we get into the portfolio. I think Web3 seems to be on everybody's mind between the Metaverse and NFTs. And you've got significant exposure there through Fantasy 360, through Game On Entertainment, and even through Momentable and some other NFT projects that you're working on. What are you seeing there? You know, is Web3 moving from this, what is this industry, to it is really going to be a part of our lives for the next 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think our shareholders have heard, us talk about Web 1, which was kind of democratizing access to information, which is, basically read. Web 2, which was read and write, where you had, social networks pop up and organize and curate a lot of the information. And then in Web 3, we're seeing this, this decentralization kind of movement. In Web 2.0, large social networks like Facebook or Google or YouTube kind of emerged, and they did some really good things. They made the user experience, really good. They organized information, curated information, allowed people to find things in a lot easier manner. But there was a trade-off, and that trade-off was owning, it was privacy and owning your own data. And we're seeing, this Web3 movement where tech is now borderless. There's amazing developers and IP coming all over the world, where new technologists are working with technology to solve a lot of the pain points that they're seeing in Web 2. It's still very early. I think when we look at this, just as a note, we look at this 5, 10, 15, 20 years kind of out. Right now, what's been very interesting is, like you mentioned, whether it was the concept of the Metaverse or NFTs, play to earn. These are all a byproduct of really bright people, playing around with these ideas and some of these platforms that have been built to kind of reimagine how they'd like things to be, or to solve pain points that they're seeing kind of today. And you see this in every, we've seen this in every kind of tech movement. At first, a lot of it is about people playing around with it. And in playing around with it, you're going to have a lot of projects fail. And I think we're at that stage right now, where every time you see a crypto boom and a crypto winter, each time the good projects survive, and the bad projects and the bad actors kind of go away. But what's interesting is there's always a movement kind of forward and a lot of progress. So, you know,
Tech doesn't stop, right?
Yeah, we're very bullish on the sector. One of the things I find super interesting is, you know, growing up here in Canada, you know, I feel like we were very, very fortunate to have access to good education, you know, good government, although some right now could argue that, good government, you know, safety, security. There are a lot of things, you know, banking, established banking system. And what we see in this Web3 movement, what I find is really interesting is that it's the ability for people or perfect strangers to connect over something. So let's say it's a you know a bathing ape NFT or a CryptoPunk NFT. Now that in its own is not going to change the world, but these people that are perfect strangers that are coming together around some sort of, you know, something that's drawing them together. Then they're pooling their funds together towards other types of other types of initiatives. So this idea of like strangers from around the world connecting with one another and then pooling their funds together to invest in or impact other types of projects. And to me, I think it's going to be really interesting to see that when you look at the stats. I mean, the fact is, you know, people, not everyone has access to equities or owning assets. And I think one of the movements with Web3 and this idea of decentralization is it's the distribution. Now, there's obviously a lot of pain points and problems with it today. It's not perfect, but I think just the idea and thought process going forward for us, you know, is a big movement. And you see this again. I remember during the dot-com boom, you had, you know, all these new technology upstarts, and then you had these old ones like HP and IBM, and the old guard always fights and says, you know, the internet is a fad. The internet's happened. And you're seeing the same
and
thing.
we saw what happened, right? Blockbuster. That's we can talk about 100 examples, but Blockbuster is what happens when the old guard ignores new tech.
Yeah, and
that's going to happen again, right, Shafin? Because
it is happening. It's happening right now. And again, the old guard, you know, whether it's someone like Jack Dorsey or
right.
You know.
Funny that Jack Dorsey doesn't see Web3. I think he's afraid that 10,000 influential social media users around the world are going to get together and create a decentralized form of Twitter.
You know,
at the end of the day,
I don't think he's afraid. I think, you know, with you know, some of the things he said before, he's a big proponent of Bitcoin. He, you know, I think in, you know, 2 points there. One, I think the old guard is always going to question the new movement, which I think is happening. But two, I think in his case, he did point out a lot of like flaws to the system. And I think this is the thing that people need to understand is that anytime there's a new technology or a new way of thinking or new ideas, there's this period of just testing. Where people are throwing things against the wall. I mean, if you go back 20 years, everything was a .com this, .com that, and not everything made sense, and not everything was required or needed. And most of the things that weren't needed, you know, fell by the wayside. But things that did make sense, that did create efficiencies, you know, emerged. And I think that's kind of the thing that's happening right now. But for us, from Victory Square's perspective, we believe that it's, you know, there's going to, Web3 is a thing. It's going to continue to grow. We believe that by being positioned well, we can provide asymmetrical returns for Victory Square shareholders. So we are plugged in and have anchors in a number of different areas in that space, and it is a big focus. However, I will say that it's still early. There's still, you know, it's still early.
Which is good, which is actually good news, right, Shafin? It's still early, still a lot of time for Victory Square to pick up great assets at cheap prices. Still a great time for Victory Square shareholders to get the benefit of that, right?
Yes, and yeah, absolutely. And also, I think like there's something to be said for a first mover advantage. So, you know, having been in this space for a number of years, you know, where there are applications that are, let's say, further along, we're already in those areas. So you mentioned, you know, Fantasy 360, which does business as immersive tech, you know, focused around the metaverse and digital assets. They've been in the game. They've worked with large Fortune 500 companies. They've got customers. They've got distribution. So there's a first mover advantage for them, you know, to be a leader in that sector and space. And the same thing with Game On and what it's doing with MX Player and Times Internet in India, and Polygon Studios. So again, like working with a large chain, working with a company that's got distribution and content. So all the sectors we're in, there's a big first mover advantage. And again, we've seen those companies that are first movers in sectors and spaces that assemble a really good team, have a good product market fit, have distribution. There's a higher probability of success, and these are big portfolio companies of ours. So
and success means monster paradigm shifting success.
Absolutely,
if you get it right. It's not incremental. It's not, oh, George Com, decent little NFT, Web3 incremental. If you get it right, you knock it out of the park.
Absolutely, and that's the big thing with when you're going, when you're going into areas that not everyone is. That's generally where you'll find the asymmetric returns, but you got to be right. And I think for us, in all of those areas, there are a number of criteria and things that we look for to mitigate our downside risk exposure, and give us the biggest opportunity to, again, for outsized returns, which is kind of what what our focus is.
And by the way, third-party validation is something I always talk about on AGORACOM. Not that Victory Square needs it, because your record speaks for itself. But when it comes to talking about, there might be people at home watching and listening to saying, yeah, I keep hearing about NFTs and I keep hearing about Web3. Maybe that's Shafin talking his book. I'm not completely convinced. But third-party validation, just the last week or so, we had Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram make major announcements with respect to how they're going to integrate NFTs into their platforms. Do you think these announcements became the inflection point where that's the ultimate legitimacy that NFTs are going mainstream, and that we all now need to start paying closer attention because the game is on? I mean, we've seen Bored Ape Yacht Club ever since the integration of Bored Apes as your ID on Twitter. They've climbed 50% in the last week. What do you think? Was that and was that good news for Victory Square to see the big social media platforms finally integrate?
Yeah, I think in our opinion, it was inevitable that the large platforms start to pay attention. Content producers start to pay attention to this. So we're not surprised by that. Excuse me. I would say kind of two things. One, for us, our viewpoint on this is that the interest level, the platforms, the companies, content producers are going to continue to play again with all of these new technologies, and through that we'll see this innovation, we'll see the sector kind of mature. However, it is still it is still very, very early, and I think for investors, the important thing right now is to, we don't want investors to miss out. We want them to get exposure to this asset class early. However, there's still a lot of friction between setting up a wallet, holding a private key.
Very complicated.
Really being able to kind of do due diligence on some of the projects and manage and maintain these projects. And so, for Victory Square, one of the reasons why we have assets in those sectors, in addition to a diverse portfolio that's not necessarily Web3, so digital health as an example, is that investors can get access to this asset class, but in the form of a diversified, kind of portfolio. Because again, given that it is early, it's going to be there's still a lot of volatility. There's going to be, again, a lot of bad actors. You're still going to see a lot of this type of stuff. But the key is, if you can pick the right winners and you can hold the right winners, then again, that's where you'll see considerable gain. So whether it's Instagram, Twitter, Bob Iger just made a statement, who is a former, head of Disney, on the impact of NFTs. It's going to be, it's inevitable that more and more people are going to be entering into the space. And again, we've seen this happen before with technology. Initially, there's this discovery phase, and then as more and more people kind of adopted, more utility and things to do get created, then there's that flywheel, kind of moment. And so I don't think we've seen that flywheel moment yet in the Web3 space. I think it's still coming, because people are still trying to figure it out, to have utility that actually makes things better and more efficient. But I think it's coming, and I think it's, as more and more developed.
But it's definitely picking up pace now, because once Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter kind of sent out that signal, that pretty much signaled every corporation on the planet to start. So I think we've shifted gears then. Is that a good way to say it? Last year, you had all the time in the world. Hey, I'll brag a little bit. My family bought 3 Bored Apes last year at the very, very beginning. We still got 2 of them, right? But you had a lot of time to make decisions and so on. But it seems like this news from Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter has now taken it up a notch, and it's starting to speed up. And so I think you're right about what you said. It's still not quite there, but we're definitely in the next phase, in the next gear. That's for sure.
Yeah, and it's inevitable. I mean, I think this is the thing too. When we started in the dot-com boom, like for us, there was no doubt that the internet and the innovation that was going to be built on top of it was going to improve in the way we connected and access information and played and did a variety of different things was going to change. And it's the same feeling we have now. The challenge for investors is that a lot of investors are very, very short term. And they're, and the volatility and they get caught up in a lot of noise. And I think what ends up happening is they end up missing out on big opportunities. And so for us, it's inevitable. This is a movement that's going to happen. How long it happens, how long it takes, or the volatility that comes along with it, is why we, again, give our investors exposure to that sector, but in a balanced kind of portfolio, so that if there is volatility or if there's another crypto winter, it really doesn't impact their portfolio or their long-term prospects.
Yeah, and you don't need to go all in on something. The great thing about being at the beginning of a paradigm shift is if you get it right, you don't have to go heavy, all in, unbalanced, like you're saying, so that way you're providing some exposure, but not so much that it's going to rock, the portfolio if things go through a crypto winter. But if you get it right, the gains are so big. I even tell some of my friends who are saying, hey, George, should I buy? How much should I invest in this token? And I say, well, look, if you really have done your research and you really think it's for you and you really think it's going to be something great in the future, you don't need to spend more than 5 or 10 grand to invest, because if you're right, you're going to get 50, 100, 200x gains out of it. So you can make, but you don't have to go mortgage the house. So I like the way Victory Square is doing it, which is, you don't have to go out balanced over the top and then put the whole portfolio at risk during the consternation.
Yeah, and one other thing to know, when we look at the sector, and it's the same way we look at other industries, is and I think we've written about this in past shareholder letters, is picks and shovels. When we look at the Web3 space, a lot of the projects we have are chain agnostic. So Covalent's a prime example. It doesn't matter whether Ethereum or Avalanche or Cardano or Polygon wins. It's irrelevant, because again, we believe in the sector as a whole, and a lot of the IP that we're funding and building is agnostic to that. So again, the other thing too is in that sector, it's one of those things where you're building tools that if you believe in the sector and industry as a whole, you're not bound or to one specific jockey.
So let's talk about that. Let's kind of switch gears there a little bit. In your 2022 outlook part of the press release, you talked about your top 5 objectives. One of that was some spinoffs, more spinoffs. And by the way, you're very successful. You had 3 successful spinoffs in 2021, a couple of successful exits. So you guys executed there. And what I like about it is that you have a nice little diversity there. You've got Stardust Solar. You've got Turnium, you've got Copilot. Let's talk about the 2022 outlook, because you guys did so well from an operational point of view in 2021.
Yeah, I want to take one step back just for a second too, because I think in that news release, we also kind of did a recap. And what's important about looking forward is to look back and see, what we accomplished, so we can feel confident in what our 2022 outlook is. And I think in 2021, we look at the year, we ended the year again with a healthy balance sheet, which was something that we talked about at the beginning of the year. So, assets increased, solid, working capital position. So investors don't necessarily need to be worried about dilution. We announced at the beginning of 2021 a share buyback. We, executed on the share buyback throughout the year. And you mentioned earlier, we gave away a share dividend. So for every 1,000 shares held, VST gave away just under $40 to shareholders. And so again, those were three things that were very, very important. We also talked about, spinouts. In 2021, we had Game On, Fantasy 360, and Covalence CQT listing. We had, two positions that we kind of exited. We sold our position in Argo blockchain in Q1 of the year.
For $1 million gain there.
Yeah, and we had the sale of
great numbers. $6 million sale of your VPN platform.
Yeah, and we also
2021 proves that Victory Square knows what it's doing, can make the right picks, and can exit.
Yeah, and we brought on new investments. Every year we talk about increasing the portfolio by 3 to 5 new projects, which allows us, to hit that target of doubling our NAV every 3 to 5 years. So whether it was Hydrate, which has been is a wholly owned sub, a really strategic acquisition of ours, IP from Aspen, which is a lot of Web3 IP that we've been building on, Stardust Solar, and Creator.co. So when we look forward to our 2022 outlook, we can feel confident, and shareholders can feel confident that we executed, on operationally on what we said we were going to do. So when we look forward, again, spinoffs are a big focus for this year. You mentioned Stardust Solar, Creator.co, Turnium, and Copilot. All of those companies are working towards a listing this year. In the spinoff, it also can, connect to our ability to give out another common share dividend for 2022, which again, we're going to put that, like we did last year, we put the question out to our shareholders and investors on getting their feedback on how they wanted us to handle kind of the share dividend. And then there's, again, 3 sectors. We talked about Web3. Digital health and climate tech are 2 other big sectors that we're focused on. Digital health is something we've been in since 2017. We've got some good assets between Victory Square Digital Health, Hydrate, Safe Test in Brazil. So we've got really good teams, really good IP, and they all revolve around diagnostic testing, telehealth, online pharmacy, and precision medicine. So these are kind of the 4 areas that we built some core IP. I think for 2022, again, because a lot of the assets we have are wholly owned, and we believe that digital health is going to continue to grow, and I think the pandemic just accelerated the adoption of that. We're going to go deeper in North America, specifically the US market, and then in Brazil, because we've already got a first mover advantage, we have the ability to build a big digital health portfolio there. So that's a big focus for us. Climate tech is something that, it started off with Stardust Solar and some other smaller projects that we've been kind of funding in the area around.
And Stardust Solar has really grown.
Stardust Solar has really grown. It's on track again to list this year. Again, the renewable space is something important. Stardust is actually expanding into the US and Mexico currently as well. And so again, I think operationally, the focus, spin out of those 4 companies, the common share dividend, continue to grow the portfolio in the Web3 digital health and climate tech space. With digital health too as well, we may actually continue to run those businesses as wholly owned subsidiaries as well, just because again, we see that there are big potential for strong cash flow in those businesses. And now the other area, which I think is really, really important for our shareholders. So as a operationally, we can see the KPIs, we can see our assets increasing, we can see our companies, the portfolio companies coming into the increased cash position increase. We can see a lot of the KPIs internally, but for a lot of shareholders, what they'll look at is the share price. And it's no secret that in the last 7 months.
Yeah, we'll address that. Let's address, and it's not unique to you guys, by the way. The small cap space just went through a really down cycle, and sometimes there's nothing you can do to avoid that.
Yeah, but I mean, for us, I think the big thing is, what we can control is continue to execute at a high level. So when we talk about doing what we said we're going to do, increasing our asset base, increasing the new portfolio companies that come in, spin off, common share dividend, like those are things that we can continue to do, help our portfolio companies execute. But I think we're going to put a big emphasis on on the share price this year, or at least getting a new addition to it. Because again, we are very, we were very disappointed with the performance of the share price. However, because we're not concerned and we've seen that the business is growing and we've seen these cycles happen, like you mentioned, it's been that negative decline has been all across the small cap space. So I think, as we look forward, we know that there's good investors sitting on the sidelines, specifically family, offices, which I think are the right type of investor to look to VST. I think building out our Discord community, increasing the amount of DD that's on there for shareholders to be able to see and share. Like, we're listening to some of the questions that they've been asking. I think the next one is going to be a breakdown of our NAV. A lot of investors have heard us on these interviews talk about, there's a big disconnect between what our market cap is and what our NAV is, and we want to,
for people to hold net asset value.
Net asset value, sorry. And
I just want to make sure. So most people know, but it's always good to speak.
And if you look at that, our market cap is around $25 million, whereas our NAV is over 100 million. And the NAV also supports our ability, to show that we've been returning over a 9x return on capital invested, like these key KPIs. And so I think, in the month of February, we are going to host a webinar with our shareholders to break down the NAV so they can actually see, And is
there any thoughts, Shafin, to actually doing a monthly NAV, just announcing it?
So we've
because I think I've seen other company that I was advising on, and they did that, and that made a huge difference. So just every month, say, hey, for the month before, this is our net asset value.
Yeah, so that is something that we're working on for this year. We wanted to do it monthly. It may end up being quarterly, but our goal is to get it out monthly. And starting in the month of February, where we don't want to just put it out, we actually want to break it down with our shareholders so they can see each of the portfolio companies, how they were valued. So was it on the last financing round? Was it on their KPIs compared to what companies that are trading on based on that? Like, we want them to actually see not just the macro number, but how that number is broken down so they can feel very comfortable in that number. And we're going to, I think, host a webinar for our shareholders at the end of February, where all of our shareholders are going to be invited to actually, watch us break down.
Yep, that'd be fantastic. You and I have been talking about that, doing a portfolio. You and I have talked about it a couple of times where we should actually do that, where we go through the portfolio on a web. So I'm glad you guys are doing that. By the way, do you still have that problem? Do you still have that small problem? Not that's a problem, but accounting rules means you could have an investment in GeorgeCom, but if you're not over a certain percentage of ownership in GeorgeCom, you can't really put that on your balance sheet, right? You'll be able to address that as well in the webinar to show, in addition to our NAV being over 100 million, we've also got investments in GeorgeCom and ABC and XYZ, but we can't put them on our balance sheet for accounting reasons because we don't own a big enough portion of them, right? Is that still there?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's like the key here is going to be, breaking down the portfolio company so they can see, for example, like in what you just mentioned, in the case of Fantasy 360, we can just look at, the most recent trade to calculate what the value of that is towards our NAV. But we can also show shareholders that from an accounting perspective, the auditors value it at cost because our ownership is over a certain amount. And I think it's important to break down.
Very important.
The NAV number on our NAV, and how that appears on our audited financials, and why. Because I think that clarity and that transparency is going to be really important, because people that take the time to see that are going to be able to see that the company is significantly undervalued. And again, that's where, when you do your research, that's where you find, the hidden gems. That's where you find value, companies that are a great entry point. And that's what we believe we have for shareholders. So shareholders that will tune in, see that breakdown, and hopefully we'll share it. That's where the opportunity to get a great entry point comes in.
Well, look, if you're a shareholder investor, that's the one. If you're only going to watch one webinar for Victory Square, that's the one you want to watch, right? Because you want to see exactly what the value is of what you're holding. And I mean, we know already shareholders would be very, very pleasantly surprised and inject another level of confidence. Shafin, we could go on talking, you and I, for 2 hours, because we love disruptive tech. There's so much more to Victory Square just by virtue of 25 portfolio companies and the sectors that you're invested in. But we probably don't have that luxury for your work schedule and for most people who are watching and listening. Let's end it off with final word to you. What's the final takeaway you want for your shareholders, and as we head into the second month of 2022?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing, just to what you and I talked about, to summarize, like, we've seen tremendous returns for investors that backed tech companies, over the last decade or two, and we're seeing that shift happening. We're seeing these tech giants, the next decade being incubated. The challenge that you and I both talked about is that it's difficult to find. These companies are now coming from all over the world. It's hard to do DD. It's still early. There's a lot of volatility. And so for Victory Square, we help investors get access to tomorrow's giants today. We identify them. We put them into Victory Square. We're finding those companies that are solving these pain points and rethinking the customer service of tomorrow in one public company. So for shareholders, by owning Victory Square, they're aligned with management who's funded and seeded this, but they get exposure to these sectors like Web3, like climate tech, like digital health, in
artificial intelligence, augmented reality, all those incredible things that Shafin people just don't have the time to do their own due diligence on, like I said, in one sector, let alone across 5 or 6 or 7 sectors.
And it's a great entry point right now. One of the things we talked about, I think it would be very good for investors to tune in to that webinar on the breakdown of NAV, because again, this is where, as investors, you find great entry points, that you can make a position in a good company and again, do whatever all of us are trying to do, which is, create wealth.
Well, and I'm going to end up, I want to emphasize what you just said, create wealth. Guys, if you're at home looking to flip something quick, make a quick buck, take from guys like me who've been doing it for 25 years, guys like Shafin, it really doesn't exist. I mean, we can all get lucky a couple of times and invest in something that just happens to skyrocket in a short period of time, but that's not an investing strategy. If you believe in the future of disruptive tech and what's going to go on this decade with the blockchain, with crypto, with tokens, NFTs, plus artificial intelligence and all these other sectors we talked about, digital health, right? Then you need to give them time to grow, and you need to find the vehicle to start investing in them today. Victory Square, that's what it does for you. I can't tell you go out and buy it because I can't give investment advice. You've got to make that decision for yourself. But the fact of the matter is, if you want to get rich slow, which is ask Warren Buffett and ask some of the most successful investors in the world, it doesn't happen overnight. If you want to get rich slow, you find great emerging trends in the market, great disruptive technologies, you find a way to get exposure to them early, and then you wait, give them time to grow, mature, and deliver that full value. And that's what Victory Square aims to do for you. They've proven it in 2021 with what they did. You have to make a decision if that's the right investment vehicle for you. We can't say it, but I'm going to say this: 12 months from now, February 1st, 2023, don't say we didn't tell you so. All right. Shafin, thanks for joining us, my friend.
Thank you.
For everybody at home, you've been watching Shafin Diamond, CEO of Victory Square Technologies, trades in Canada under VST. For our friends in the US, VSQTF. For our friends in Europe on Frankfurt under 6F6. Time for you to do your due diligence. Take a look at the company's profile page at AGORACOM to get a good overall picture, because there's a lot to absorb here. And then make sure to hop over to the company's website, to do your deeper dive due diligence. But don't forget, the deepest dive due diligence you can do is the company's webcast webinar that's going to be taking place at the end of the month. Look for details of that on AGORACOM, on Victory Square, and make sure you be there. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. See you next time. Hey guys, this video is over, but don't forget to help your company by liking it and then leaving a comment below. And then don't forget to help yourself by subscribing to our channel so you don't ever miss another great AGORACOM small cap video.